And like I said, again, thank you so much for setting the time aside to make us feel special and make us feel important, and honestly make us feel seen and heard, because I will say that I have gotten so much more clarity and confidence in my performances since you have engaged in a new marketing strategy since a few years back. And I have just really benefited and want to thank you again for doing that. The shout outs, the engagements that you do, the way that you've cross-knitted the community together through highlighting artists has been a huge benefit to me. I've seen artists, I've been inspired by people that I've never seen or noticed on the internet otherwise that you've been able to bring up. And I just want to say thank you that it's working and the value is really appreciated. So I'm excited to see how today will empower and grow the individuals who decide to take their time and participate in today's session.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Morgan.
That's so good to hear.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good to hear. All right. Should we get started?
Yeah, let's get started. As this is being recorded, so anybody who's joining late will be able to watch this video once again once we're done. And for anybody that is joining, they should, like I said, be here within the next 3 to 5 minutes. So you're welcome to start anytime you're ready.
All right. Sorry. All right. Oops. Oh no, why? It was literally I hit reverse and then everything went away. Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to Liability Insurance for Performers, hosted by Specialty Insurance Agency, or SIA. That's what we usually call it in-house, because otherwise it's just a mouthful. If anybody would like a presentation, we can pass that along. And Maria passed along some questions that you came up with prior to the presentation, so we'll address those at the end. But be sure to write down any questions you have that come up during the presentation, and we'll do an open Q&A as well. My name is Heather Zenzen. I'm the president of SIA. A little bit about me. I earned my degree in political science, but I've never been a politician. Instead, before selling insurance to mimes and mermaids, I managed marketing and teenagers at the largest youth circus in North America. I was a soldier in the U.S. Army, and I also employed myself by making stuff up and writing it down. I've been written for local campaigns and businesses, but novel-length work is usually my sweet spot. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota with my family, 5 cats, and a clown dog.
My buttons are not working today. All right. So my name is Libby Ulm. I am our communications and marketing manager. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota with my 2 cats, Sirius and Stella, one clearly enjoying his holiday hat in this picture. I grew up dancing, but I quickly transitioned into the circus arts. I went to a show when I was, I believe, 4 or 5, and I saw an aerialist, and I said to my mom, I was like, I want to be up there. And she's like, I think you start out a lot closer to the ground. But I went on to train various aerial acts, theater, dance, contortion, hand balancing, all of the works. I did that for 13 years. After I graduated from high school, I went to college where I participated in the fall musicals and the spring dance concert, both as a choreographer and a dancer. And I've continued to choreograph every year, even after graduating, for their annual dance concert. And then in 2017, when I graduated college, I joined Minnesota Dance Collaborative, which is a company that marries theater and dance. 2020, as we all picked up something to do at home. So I started playing the ukulele, and then I quickly transitioned over to guitar because there's only so much you can do with a uke. But I've pretty much had art involved in my life for as long as I can remember, which makes SIA the perfect job for me.
Hi, my name is Ariel Begley, and I am the agency manager here at SIA. I have been performing for as long as I can remember. I was raised by mimes in South Dakota, so I grew up performing mime with my family mime troupe all over the Midwest primarily, but kind of all over. I then went to school and I earned my degree in acting at Northern Illinois University. After that, I moved to Chicago, and I worked for many years as an actress and circus performer with a variety of theaters and companies all throughout the Chicago area. I also co-founded my own physical theater and event entertainment company, Imagining Ensemble, while I was based in Chicago. And so I've done a little bit of dabbling into booking as well, and kind of booking myself and booking other performers through that. I love to travel, and I have toured all over as a stilt walker, a fire performer, a clown, a mime, really jack of all trades, physical performer. I dabbled in a lot, having grown up in it from the beginning. In 2017, I packed up my bags and I took my sweet and spicy kitty, who just ran away from her little perch, to move to the Twin Cities, where I could continue pursuing my career as an artist and a performer. Today, I'm not performing quite as much. I've got a 1.5-year-old toddler at home, and but I'm still out there and doing gigs. So you'll still see me out and about doing some stilt walking or fire performing from time to time. And when I'm not performing or working, I like nerding out on all things sci-fi and fantasy. I like hanging out with my kitty cat and going on grand epic adventures with my partner and my kiddo. And I just joined the SIA team last spring, about a year ago almost. And I've loved being able to continue supporting artists around the country through my work with SIA.
All
right. So for those of you who don't know Specialty Insurance Agency, we're a family, woman, and veteran-run company. Al Fellerman was my grandfather. He founded the agency in 1982. He was an insurance agent, but he was also a literal clown. And when he performed, he was starting to be asked for proof of his commercial general liability coverage. Coverage for clowns wasn't really widely available at the time, so he started up his own policy to cover not only himself, but also his clown friends. Then my mom, Stephanie Weiss, started working with her father and expanded the types of performers covered under our policy. She continued after he retired, adding a new policy covering mobile vendors selling their wares at fairs, festivals, farmers markets, and the like. I began working alongside my mom in 2020, and my husband and our current vice president, Noah, he's been working behind the scenes since the early 2000s, supporting SIA's technological needs. He pretty much keeps our website running and thinks of improvements that can be made so it's easier for clients to navigate. In October of 2021, Noah, my husband, and I acquired the agency. We're dedicated to continuing the legacy of supporting individual artists and small business owners, as well as partnering with nonprofit organizations serving similar groups. We pride ourselves on customer service. So when you call our office, you get to speak to our staff directly, and over half of our team are artists themselves. As a small family-owned business, we were established on the values of service, community, and perseverance. We understand the dream of doing what you love, the fortitude it takes to pursue one's passion, and the struggles of being a little guy in a world of corporate conglomerates. We carry that dream, that passion, and that tenacity into our business. If you want to know who SIA clients are, think mimes and mermaids, fire performers and aerialists, or food trucks and farm stands, artists and crafters, and kettle corn booths. And just to prove how much this company actually does matter to me, my own daughter is one of our insureds because she's an aerialist. So I know that if we didn't do what we do, a lot of performing artists wouldn't be able to work today.
All right, so let's talk about liability insurance for performers. In the past few years across the industry, we've experienced more and more events and venues cracking down on insurance requirements. And this is to help better protect themselves from certain liabilities. So this is where commercial general liability, or CGL policy, comes into play. The standard CGL policy helps protect you in situations where somebody like an audience member is injured as a result of your performance, if there is somehow property damage, or even if you offend somebody. This policy, however, does not cover injuries to yourself. So if you're rehearsing or performing and you're injured, that would be your personal health insurance. It also does not cover injury to a fellow performer who is also insured with us. So when you guys are performing and if you all had policies with us and you injured the other party, that is not something that could be covered.
So a lot of you might be wondering, like, what is covered? Like, what's an example of a claim? So these are all based off of real things that we've seen come through as claims. There was one guy, he was a mime, and he was miming to an audience member that he was going to jump into this guy's arms. And, you know, he's not verbalizing it because he's a mime, right? So the guy seemed to be on board. I don't know, he probably didn't know what the mime was talking about, but he seemed to give consent. But then the mime jumps in the guy's arms, and now all of a sudden he has back pain and the mime ends up getting sued. So that was a claim that we actually paid out on. And it's just a lesson that you always do need to get verbal consent. Another one, this one's one of my favorites. So this guy, he was like kind of one of those jack of all trades performers like Ariel, and he was booked at a county fair. And he packed up his tiny unicycle and his pogo stick, and he went to the fair, and it was in the summer, it was super hot. And so he set up a safe perimeter. He did everything right, except for as he's doing his pogo trick stunts, he's jumping, he's getting really high, he's flipping in the air. His palms are really sweaty because it's hot, and the pogo stick gets away from him, flips through the air, and beam some lady in the head who's sitting at a picnic bench, and then she gets taken away by ambulance. She ended up being okay, but again, another example of something that would be paid out.
So why is insurance important? Not only should you consider an insurance policy to protect yourself and meet the requirements for certain events and venues, but to also make yourself stand out as a dedicated professional in your field. It's really important. Holding an insurance policy could mean that you get booked over someone else. We recently attended a conference with the International Association of Fairs and Expos, where we met lots of staff and members from the fairs and festivals across the country. And in some of those discussions, we found out that some fairs won't even consider booking your act if you don't have insurance at the time of their application. So having that insurance ready to roll, showing that you are a professional in that field and that you're ready to do the acts and do the events in a safe way can really give you that edge when you're working.
All right, so this is going to be a little bit longer piece. We're going to talk about numbers and prices and all of that, so bear with me. For our performers, we have two groups. So group one is considered our low risk performers, and group two is considered our high risk performers. That's defined by our underwriters. Obviously, we know that fire performers and aerialists are some of our safest performers because they have to be. The pricing that we're going to go over here is our current pricing, but when you're going to apply online, we always have this very clearly laid out on the website, so you can always check that when you're applying for the most up-to-date pricing. But this pricing is what it will be through the last day of March of 2024. So majority of our performers hold an option 1 policy, and that is pretty much the industry standard, which is $1 million per occurrence and $2 million for the general aggregate. General aggregate just means the most that you would be paid out per policy period. So our group 1 performers currently pay $284, and then our group 2 performers pay $306. Policies can start on any day of your choice as long as it's in the future, because backdating insurance is illegal. Whether you're in group 1 or group 2, both of these policies break down to less than $1 a day. However, the full amount does need to be paid at the time of your application to get the insurance. We also offer single event coverage, which is $140. You can upgrade to the annual within 30 days of your start date. And there is a $10 admin fee that is added to the difference that you pay. We also have higher option of $3 million per occurrence and $5 million for the general aggregate. So our group 2 performers pay $476, and group 1 pays $446. Single event is $194. And again, you can upgrade to the annual within 30 days of your single event start date. But if you are upgrading from a single event at option 2, you do have to stay at option 2 for the remainder of your policy period. You can't go back down to the option 1 limits once you have option 2, just for that policy period.
There's some other, we call them riders. These coverages ride on your commercial general liability coverage. And one of them is assistant coverage. So performers have the option to add an assistant or even multiple assistants to your policy for an additional $95 a person. However, it can't be another performer. So an assistant can do things like set up and tear down, manage the crowd, be a fire safety, that kind of thing. Basically, if the show can go on without them, then they're probably an assistant. It's not a named individual. So if you buy an assistant and you have Bob Smith working one gig, you can have Aaron Jones work the next gig. It doesn't have to be the same person who's always helping you out. We also have inland marine coverage, which is a really silly way of covering your business personal property. Like the name doesn't make any sense, but that's what it's called in the insurance world. So business personal property is things like your props, your costumes, your aerial rig, your computer, because you use it to book gigs. That stuff could be covered under inland marine coverage. And just like an example of something that would be paid out for inland marine. During Hurricane Ian, one of our vendors carried inland marine, and the storage area where he kept all of his merchandise was completely flooded. So the inland marine coverage paid for all of that merchandise that he ended up losing in the hurricane. We also have sexual abuse and molestation coverage. This is what we'll usually see requested from malls or schools. It doesn't protect you against a claim if you abused or molested someone, but rather if you're left in charge of a group of students and something happens between them. See, you're liable for that group of students and what happens. So that's the kind of thing that coverage would pay for.
All right, let's talk about additional insured certificates. So you've booked the gig and you've received your contract and you've read that the event or venue where you are performing wants to be listed as an additional insured on your policy, or they might ask to be added to your policy. However they describe it, they're talking about the same thing. They're talking about being an additional insured. So what does that really mean? So the place that you are performing, where you are performing, wants to be protected in case something arises out of your performance while you're on their property. So by adding an event or a venue as an additional insured to your policy, it protects them under your policy, allowing them to file a claim if they were sued due to something that arose specifically from your actions and your performance.
Not all events and venues require a
Bring it back. An additional insured can't, however, be another individual. It must be the event or the venue that's organizing that. Certificates can be for a one-time event, or they can be for the length of your policy period. So when you submit your request in our system, you can select NA, meaning that it's only needed for the exact length of that event. You can add include setup teardown, which makes your certificate valid for one day before and one day after the event dates that were listed to allow for setting up and tearing down, or ongoing for policy period. And this is where the certificate will be active for the entirety of the policy from the day you request it through the end of that policy expiration. This is a great option if you know you're going to be performing with the same event or venue multiple times, so you don't need to keep submitting it. You know, you're going to be working with Disney all summer long. Great, Disney's an additional insured. For example, you were booked by the Florida State Fair to do a fire performance with your group. You get your prop set, your fire safety people are all in place, but during the performance, you drop your fire fan. Your fire safety runs up, they take care of it right away, but they do notice that there was some damage done to the property. Afterwards, the state of Florida sues the fair for that property damage. The Florida State Fair will be able to claim under your insurance instead of their own, in this instance, saving them the possible increase in their own premiums due to the claim activity. So often a fair's own event insurance will even require certificates of additional insured from any contractor they're hiring as a condition of their coverage so that this type of activity can be covered that way. Some insurances do charge for their, some insurance companies do charge for their certificates, but SIA's policies include unlimited free certificates of additional insured. We have over 6,000 approved events and venues in our online database that you can select from. And if your event or venue doesn't pop up, you can always create a new one that's tailored to the specific event description and language that's needed in that contract. If your event is one of our approved events, then you'll receive your certificate back immediately after you hit submit, while client-generated certificates will be returned in 1 to 2 business days. We do always offer rush services upon request, and not all events or venues require a certificate of additional insured and are okay with seeing just your proof of insurance. You don't need to submit a certificate of request for every event you're doing. It's really when that event or venue is requiring the additional support for that.
All right, so as we've said, fairs, events, performance venues, they are starting to require more and more that the performers have their own insurance, and that's only expected to continue. When you submit a certificate of additional insured, those do get sent back to us to verify that you have insurance. So if it's found that you've submitted a document to a venue that's sent to us and you don't have a policy, or that it was doctored in some way, like you've changed your policy period, that kind of thing, that would be considered insurance fraud. So committing insurance fraud means not only will you not be able to obtain insurance in the future, but you also run the risk of losing your career because no insurance means no bookings. We as an insurance agency are also required to report fraudulent documents to the insurance commissioner. That can result in penalties like fines, community service, or even jail time for you. If you have insurance, don't give out your proof of insurance to anyone other than directly to the venue itself, because if you send that to somebody and somebody doctors your proof of insurance, you could be considered an accessory to insurance fraud. So we had a group of almost 30 fire performers, not this New Year's Eve, but the year before. They were booked for a gig at Area 15 in Las Vegas, and I was working with the coordinator to make sure that, everyone had a policy. They needed like 2 different certificates, so we were tracking everything together. And he emailed me and he was like, "Hey, you haven't sent out, this person's proof of insurance or certificate." And I was like, "Well, they don't have a policy." So he sends me their quote unquote policy. And I was like, "This is fake, that like they don't have an account here. This is a fraudulent document." So that person got fired the night before the gig. They were fired from the gig itself and the company, and they're left with not being able to obtain insurance in the future. And especially with fire performing, there are not many companies out there that are willing to provide insurance for that. So that's kind of just, we understand, obviously, it's maybe not something you're expecting to buy, which is why sometimes our single event and upgrading is a good option because it helps break up that payment a little bit. But it's definitely not worth it to doctor those documents.
Okay, so finally, we'll go over some of the questions that Maria passed along from all of you. Number one, what's the best way to add others to your insurance policy? Are there differences between group policies or single policy? So our individual performer policy covers you, the artist. We do have a group policy, but there's a lot of restrictions around fire performing, aerial work about what they'll cover. And also that group policy would only insure that business only. So that means if you went off, so say it's insuring, I can't think of any names, Zen Entertainment. I would only be insured as, say, a costume character at Zen Entertainment, whereas if I went off and performed on my own, there wouldn't be any coverage. So that's something to consider. And then if you're talking about adding an event or venue to your policy, that's just an additional insured certificate that we went over earlier. Number two, what do you do if something happens and you need to use your policy? What would you do in case of an injury to the audience? How does filing a claim happen? So types of covered claims are injuries to audience members, damage to property, or even offending someone. Should you need to file a claim, you just need to log into your online account and use the file a claim form. After that, we submit the claim to our carrier who assigns a claim examiner to your case. That claim examiner will be in contact with you throughout the claim process. If there's a lawsuit, you'll be expected to help mount a defense. What documentation should be present at every event and in the case of accidents? So you don't really need any documentation of your insurance at an event. Often you'll need a certificate of additional insured, like we talked about, but that's sent prior to the event. And in the case of an accident, you'll just want to do what you can to document the situation and collect witness information to assist with the claim. Number four, do you need insurance for teaching workshops? Having insurance as an instructor is highly recommended, but we don't currently have a teaching policy at this time. It's something we want to add in the future. The challenge is finding a carrier that wants to write that kind of coverage, and that is super challenging. But right now, our policy insures performing, not teaching or coaching. One of our employees does own an aerial studio, so if you were interested in teaching or coaching coverage, I can tell you the two markets I know of that write that coverage. Is there any protection for rogue event attendees who think they're allowed and try to get on the silks while I am not performing? That's question 5. So your performance area should always have a clearly marked perimeter to avoid having attendees wander anywhere near your equipment. Having an assistant to help protect that perimeter is also good. But know that there's an exclusion on the policy for athletic participation. So if an injury happens because an audience member climbed your silk, that claim's not going to be covered and you're personally on the hook for that loss. It's extremely important to protect your performance area from audience members. Is my freestanding rig covered under my policy in all scenarios, or should I buy my own insurance? Okay, for this one, it depends on what you mean by covered. So are you covered if another performer is using your rig, it fails, they're injured and they sue you? No, because there's a rigging exclusion in the policy. You are not insured for rigging. Are you covered if you're injured by your own rig? No, because this policy is for injury or damage to others. Are you covered if an audience member trips over your rig because the perimeter wasn't secured? Yes, likely that would be a covered loss. Are you covered if your rig is stolen? Maybe. It depends if you had that weird inland marine coverage that we talked about, ensuring the loss of your business personal property. All right, question 7, and this is the last one that I had. So if anybody has any other questions, be prepared to share them. If using another's artist equipment, what should the borrower consider? Okay, you should always inspect the equipment for wear and tear for your own personal safety, as well as double checking any rigging. My daughter, who I mentioned is an aerialist, works for an entertainment booking company and has experienced in the past shoddy rigging. For the last gig on New Year's Eve, she actually went in early to check the rigging, found that a span plate should have been used and wasn't, which she kind of expected. So she had brought her own and re-rigged the apparatus. Aerialists especially should be knowledgeable about rigging and always check it themselves. Never trust others. If you're borrowing equipment out, also be super careful. Always consider making those using your equipment sign a hold harmless agreement in case something goes wrong, because like I said, that's not covered if something goes wrong. Performer insurance does not insure you for borrowing your equipment, so do what you can to protect yourself. In the case of my daughter, working for this entertainment booking company, she had to sign a contract with said company that included that hold harmless clause. So if their rigging failed, she wouldn't even be able to sue them. Again, that's why it's so important to be knowledgeable and check borrowed equipment's conditions. So that's all we have. if anybody has any questions, now's the time to answer. Otherwise, our contact info is right there.
Fantastic. I do have a follow-up question that relates to the group coverage that you had mentioned.
Mhm.
And that question is there a limit if, let's say, Fluidity Performance Group decides to get group coverage for artists who perform under Fluidity Performance Group? Is the detail still leaves the artists as independent artists and doesn't pressure them to become employees of that company?
Yes. So, okay, you can get group coverage for Fluidity, but the performer, but not if you're doing aerial or firework. Let's say Fluidity is just a group of costume characters, okay, or stilt walkers. Like, say you're just doing stilt walking and costume characters. You can get group coverage for Fluidity covering all of those people. It's going to ask how many is the maximum people you're going to book at once, and you're going to get a quote for that. And then it doesn't have to be the same person that you're booking. You're covered for events booking or like that have that number of people at an event. However, if one of your performers goes out and performs on their own, there's no coverage for them because they're not performing as Fluidity.